Hello and welcome back to NeoEnglish, the podcast where we help you understand and discuss current events in English every day.
Today's topic is about the Federal Reserve and a new rule they want to change for big Wall Street banks. Don't worry if this sounds difficult. We will explain everything step by step.
First, let's talk about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, or Fed for short, is the central bank of the United States. It controls money and helps keep the economy stable.
And what are Wall Street banks? These are very big banks in the US, like JPMorgan or Goldman Sachs. They do a lot of business not just in America, but all over the world.
Now, the main news is that the Fed wants to ease a capital rule. Let's break this down. To ease means to make something less strict or easier. For example, if your teacher eases the homework, you have less work. Or, if your boss eases the rules, you don't have to follow them so closely.
The capital rule is a law for banks. It says banks must keep a certain amount of money, called capital, safe. This way, if there is a problem, the bank has money to pay for it. For example, if a bank has many loans and people don't pay them back, the bank still has its own money as a backup. Or if there's a crisis, the bank won't go broke.
So, the Fed wants to make this rule easier. They think banks should keep a little less money as backup. The banks say the old rule makes it hard for them to do business, like lending money or investing.
However, not everyone likes this idea. At least two Fed officials disagree. They think if banks have less money as a backup, it might make the banking system weaker.
This is called dissent, when you do not agree with a decision. For example, you can dissent if you don't want pineapple on pizza. Or, in a meeting, some people might dissent about a new plan.
Now, let's try to explain this again in a simpler way. The Fed wants to change a rule so big banks don't need as much extra money in their pockets. Some leaders think this will help banks do more business, but others are worried it might be risky.
That's the big story. Let's go over some vocabulary and phrases. Federal Reserve, Fed, the central bank of the U.S. It manages money in the country. Example: the Fed sets interest rates. The Fed helps keep banks safe. Wall Street banks, very big banks in the United States. Example: Wall Street banks like to invest in big projects. Wall Street banks are important for the economy. Ease, to make something less strict. Example: the rules were eased during the holiday. Parents sometimes ease the bedtime for kids. Capital, money that banks must keep safe. Example: the bank has enough capital to cover losses. Businesses need capital to start new projects. Rule, a law or instruction that must be followed. Example: there is a rule not to run in the hallway. The city made a new rule about parking. Dissent, when you disagree with a decision. Example: there was dissent in the team about the new uniforms. She voiced her dissent at the meeting.
And here's the story in another style to help you learn. The biggest banks in America have to keep extra money as a safety net. The people in charge, the Fed, want to let banks keep less extra money. Banks say this will help them work better. But not everyone agrees. Some Fed leaders think it could be dangerous if banks aren't careful.
Every word and phrase we talked about today is helpful when you talk about news or business in English. For example, you can say, the company eased its dress code, or there was dissent in the meeting.
That's all for today's episode of NeoEnglish. If you want to keep learning and don't want to miss the daily news, subscribe to our podcast. We'll see you again tomorrow for another easy English conversation about the news. Bye.
Goodbye and keep practicing your English.